Okay, so for the camera, started off initially as a pharmacist in the mid-50s, back in South Africa, which is where I come from. So you have to listen very carefully because I have an accent. And that's modulated by 32 years in Australia of another accent, so I'm a bit of a Heinz 57 variety. And from pharmacy into pharmacology, physiology, forensic toxicology, pathology. I'm trying to find a position here where I don't yell at me. That kind of me-ology as well. And then I got out of mainstream and I went feral. I became a clinical nutritionist. I became a remedial massage therapist. I crossed the line. I went away from the traditional orthodox medicine because what I wanted to do was find out why. Not what you have and what to take. I wanted to find out why people get sick. And it's now been going on 54 years into this quest. And I'm happy to tell you that after 54 years, I don't have a clue. Okay? That's the nice thing about it. All I can say is that it seems to be that we get sick because of what we do. So that's all going to be covered within the scope of what we're going to do. So I might as well move on. I've been doing this a long time. I have trained as a Buteyko practitioner. That is the legendary Professor Buteyko. Yes, I've studied with him and I've shaken his hand and I've drunk vodka with him. And he doesn't speak a word of English. So no, I couldn't train with him because he couldn't speak English. I trained with an interpreter who decided that he was paid by the word, and if Professor Buteyko was asked a question and he went, da, which is yes, this man would say, well, it is in the considered opinion of the professor that all things being taken into consideration, you can probably think that the answer was yes. You know, so it completely distorted everything that we were doing. Any case, the man's name has become the modality. You can't teach Buteyko. He was a person and he's dead. You can't teach Buteyko. You can teach breathing balance. You can teach balancing of biochemistry. You can teach all the philosophies that he espoused. And there's nothing wrong with the science of what he said and what he did. Where the thing became distorted was when it came to the West, there was no control over who could teach this. There was no control over who could be trained. So anybody with the money could go and attend a course and become a Buteyko practitioner, and yesterday I couldn't spell expert and today I are one. And the whole thing became completely distorted across the Western world. There is nothing wrong with the philosophy. I teach it. I teach it and I train people in the Buteyko method. But what I've done is I've taken the three areas where I felt there was something lacking. The one was, it is 60 years old to the year. I don't know of a single medical or health technology over the last 60 years that has not undergone a change. That hasn't modernized, that hasn't taken advantage of technology, that hasn't smartened itself up to become more relevant in a field where everybody looks at befores and afters and they want graphs and pictures and means, and they want to be able to compare. And they want to compare objectively rather than subjectively. The second thing is that all he really had to measure was the breath hold, or known as the controlled pause, which was basically the amount of time it took from the time that you held your breath to the time that the breathing response said, I would like to breathe. That is subjective. You do it 3 times, you get 3 different answers. You do it one way on a Monday, you have something different on the Tuesday, you get a different answer. And some people cannot hold their breath. Some people who as children nearly drowned or were locked in closets or nearly strangled. This memory comes back when they try and hold their breath and they can't hold their breath. So they can't do it. So all I did was I brought in an objective measurement, which is graphic and which I'll show you a little later, which makes it a lot easier to understand what is going on. So my other dear friend, We've been friends for the last 13 years. Everything that I know about dentistry, I learned from John. Everything that he knows about breathing and physiology and respiration, he learned from me. We've worked together for many, many years. That was my 70th birthday, by the way. And he's in Germany now, and I'm here, and we talk regularly. And he's kind of stayed with early interventive ortho and children, because that's where he really loves to be. He doesn't do much with sleep, he doesn't do much with adults. I moved across to sleep and adults. So whilst his focus is on the myofunctional, my focus is on the physiological. Okay, and just a quick comment, James, I never talk about breathing rate. I always talk about breathing rate and volume. It's pat your head and rub your tummy at the same time. Because you could be breathing 3 breaths a minute at 6 liters of air per breath, and you'd be a mess. I have some people who breathe at 16, 18 breaths per minute who regulate beautifully, and their biochemistry is really great. So the stuff that I do is light-hearted but scientific, okay? I have a weird sense of humor, but I certainly respect the people who were largely responsible for what I know. And the first bloke was a guy called Newton, and Newton's third law of motion is what underpins virtually everything that goes wrong. Because for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. And that reaction is not necessarily where you might expect it to be. So the person who's standing like this, or the dentist or the hygienist who's working like this, is creating an action which breeds an opposite reaction. You cannot get away from the Newtonian principle in anything that moves, and we move. The other bloke was Bohr, okay? This is Christian Bohr. He was the father of Niels Bohr, the physicist. Christian Bohr was nominated for a Nobel Prize in 1904 when he showed that as the pressure of carbon dioxide in arterial blood drops, so does the bond between the oxygen and the hemoglobin get tighter. He proved it. No, it wasn't published in the Lancet, because there was no Lancet. There was no Cochrane review, there was no peer review, there was none of the stuff upon which so much of what we do today is predicated was not around when Newton and Bohr were around. Does anybody doubt their findings because it wasn't peer-reviewed or written up in a journal? Fact is fact. And I once heard a really marvelous statement. And the statement says that the absence of evidence is evidence of absence. Just because something hasn't been trialed, or hasn't been verified, or hasn't been proved, does not mean it is not valid, it does not exist, and it does not work. It just means that the system has not yet found a way to control for the uncontrollable. There are some things you clinically cannot trial. Anybody here believe that mother's love exists? Ever seen clinical trials to prove it? Double-blinded randomized trials? Placebo-controlled? There are some things you do not have to prove. It's very nice to prove a lot of things. Scientifically, it's great to have validation. But sometimes the anecdotal is as powerful. And that is where I have a little bit of a hang-up. I'm going to declare that hang-up. I've been a scientist for well over 50 years. And I don't believe that everything has to be clinically trialed before you can use it. And I really don't mind retrospective stuff either, provided we're not talking about brain surgery or transplanting limbs. So again, this is light-hearted and scientific. So you guys have got a lot to learn, okay? You've got to learn all about the muscles of the face. You've got to learn all about the nerves. You've got to learn, no, you don't. All you have to do is hook up with an orofacial myofunctional therapist. because they're trained to do this. And you are dentists, you are doctors, you are oral physicians. You don't need to spend your time fiddling around with tongues and muscles and exercises, etc. Find somebody who knows, and there are people who know, trust me. There are people who know. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting the locals. Kim I know extremely well. I know that she's been around since Pontius was a pupil pilot. And Kim has trained, more than 1,000 orofacial myologists. So most of you are out of town. Talk to Kim. She probably knows somebody in your area that she has either trained or can point you towards so that you can have an OMT on hand to help you. It is vitally important because you cannot do it all by yourself, because we all have our own little specialties. So this guy had it right, huh? He said it's more acceptable to fail conventionally than to succeed unconventionally. Isn't that sad? But isn't it so true? But the irony of what we're doing is what I'm going to give you today is more conventional than what is being practiced at the moment. My second week at university, we had a mad Irish professor, and he stood up and he looked around the room and he said, let me tell you something. With the majority of illnesses, you treat them, it takes a week. You leave them, it takes 7 days. And in those days, it was basically true. We didn't have the dangerous side effects of so many of the medications. We didn't have the comorbidities that exist today as a consequence of the iatrogenic effects of so many of the medications. And I remember when I was an apprentice pharmacist, I was about 15. In the dispensary, we only had one warning label: shake the bottle. Today in a dispensary, you get a prescription that's got 11 warning labels on it. Do not eat grapefruit, don't eat cheese. But the kicker is you take a sleeping pill and it has a warning label which says, warning, this product could make you drowsy. You think like, whoa, hello, it's a sleeping pill. So I remember sending out a bottle of medicine, and I never told the mother to shake the bottle. And I ran to my boss and I said to him, what do I do? And with a straight face, he said, call her and tell her to shake the child. And I actually semi-believed him, and I said, I can't do that. So he laughed. He said, don't worry, she won't die. And I think that was a lot of it. We don't die. So my question now calls into discussion. What is a gold standard? What is evidence-based? What is best practice? It's what people do mostly. The gold standard is what has been done, what has been trialed, and what is being done. Evidence-based is what came out of what was trialed. We've heard so much over the last few years about trials where information has been hidden, where it's been spun, where it's been skewed. I mean, there's not a big pharmaceutical company around. And remember, trust me, I was a pharmacist, okay, who haven't paid fines of $3 and $4 billion because they've been caught out. And we had a classic case in Australia where one of the drug companies was marketing its new combined preventer reliever. And I was in a small town, and they were doing a trial at the hospital, and the doctor in charge of that hospital who was selected to do the trial was really excited. And he gave an interview to the local newspaper stating that his hospital had been selected to do the trial. And he said, I'm confident that at the end of the trial it will prove that this product does what it says. So it's well, why bother to do the trial then? So I am a little leery about sticking too strongly to the fact that this is evidence-based, this is gold standard, this is the way we do it. There are other ways to do things. In our lifetimes, we will only ever catch 4 things, okay? We'll catch a virus, We'll catch a bacterium, we'll catch a parasite, and we'll catch a fungus. That's all we can catch. Those are the 4 categories of communicable diseases. Everything else, almost everything else, is created by what we do. You don't catch headaches. I just caught a headache. You don't do that. You don't catch crooked teeth. You don't sit next to a child in school who's got crooked teeth and you come home with crooked teeth. You don't catch snoring. And you don't catch chronic tiredness. Everything else is created as a consequence of what we do. You don't catch poor posture, for heaven's sake. You create poor posture through Newton's third law. You hang about this way, this is going to do this. That reminds me of the story about the guy who went to a cheap tailor. And he went for fitting. And the trousers were the wrong length. So the tailor said, well, if you stand like this, they'll be okay. And then the jacket sleeves were wrong. He said, well, if you stand this way, it'll fit. And another guy walked in, he said to his wife, gee, he's got to be a great tailor. If he can make a suit to fit a cripple like that, he's good enough for me. All right. So we don't catch bad posture. We don't catch poor nutrition. Question. Is there anybody in this room who has ever found food in their mouths by mistake? Whoops, I wonder who put that there. And that goes particularly...
a lot of liquid in our mouth by choice.
We'll discuss that later. I'm talking about chocolate specifically. I have no idea how that chocolate got into my mouth. Wrong. Yeah, put it there. Look how we sit. Now that's my favorite chair. I'm going to sit in it even if it knocks my vertebrae sideways. And we escalate emotion. We escalate challenge. Sometimes the payoff of getting so angry and so upset is so fantastic. We deliberately do it and then we regret it afterwards. So let's look at the apnea-hyperventilation link. Who believes that doctors really know what hyperventilation is, accept it and acknowledge it? Anybody here believe that? Oh, take a tranquilizer, or just calm down, or just get a hold of yourself. You're hyperventilating, slow down. Hyperventilation is extremely serious. And in fact, there is a direct link between overbreathing, hyperventilation, and central sleep apnea. And I did not say this. This was said by a very, very smart man. 13 to 14,000 breaths a day we should be taking. Most people are taking 30,000 breaths a day. And this guy, Professor Peter Gay, and by the way, you saw that, Alan got my slide in there instead. But what I wanted to point out here is that the hyperventilation has links to so many other things that people don't even consider. So what has everybody been talking about? Everybody talks about sleep, disordered breathing. How many hours do we sleep? 6? 7? 8? How many hours are we awake? 18, 20, 24? What about we look at breathing, disordered sleep? Is it not possible that what we are doing during the day is going to cause that degree of dysfunction that it will carry over into the nighttime? Why should we only look at what goes on at night, the treatment for which is nothing but short-term intervention? It is either a machine or an appliance to try and get us through the night. It does absolutely nothing to address the cause of what is going on during the day, the consequence of which could very well carry itself through tonight. Now please, I want you to accept that everything that I say is basically generalized in nature. For every single condition we talk about, we could find an equal and opposite condition that gives us exactly the opposite answer. I'm talking now generally speaking. do a little test. Everybody sit up straight, please. The entire room moved. Okay? You were all sitting Newtonesque. You were sitting like this, the head was doing this, the mouth was doing this, the shoulders were doing this. You weren't even aware of it. So what I want to highlight here is the stuff that we do 18 hours a day. Is it not possible that this could have an effect on what we're doing at night? And that is what this whole august gathering here is about. How do we get together as a group of people with our own specialties and our own knowledge and our own skills and say, how can I help you, Dr. Knight, with what you are doing by, as Dr. Day, teaching somebody to do something else? And that is the heart, that is the guts of interdisciplinary, multimodal, differential diagnosis. You call it whatever you want. It's the ability to work together to get a better result. So this is Dr. Peter Gay. Does anybody know him? Do you know him, James? Lovely guy, smart guy. And this is what he said. He gave an interview to ResMed, 2007, in their Res Medica magazine. And I'm not going to read the whole thing for you because it's quite technical. I've highlighted the two things that he said. The first one is a characteristic feature of central sleep apnea is hyperventilation. And he furthermore went on to say, and you can see it there, in healthy individuals, CO2 levels normally rise during sleep. If we go to sleep with a low CO2 level below the apnea threshold, breathing will be inhibited and reduced or even stop until the CO2 rises when breathing recommences. I have a lot of this type of stuff. So what it's saying is, if our reservoir, our CO2 reservoir, is low, our oxygen reservoir is going to be low. Hello, bore. Okay? If we want to increase the flow of oxygen to the brain off the blood, we have to increase the amount of carbon dioxide living in the alveoli. And that is what we call the EtCO2, the end tidal carbon dioxide. There is a finite amount of carbon dioxide in the body, and it is finite based on the amount of exercise you do and the amount of food that you consume, because your CO2 production is a byproduct of metabolism or exercise. And if the body has utilized all it can from those two sources, and it is short, you are going to become hypocapnic. It's not a complicated process. It's not complicated at all. So I have a question for you. I have several, but you're only going to get them one at a time, okay? I don't want to confuse you. Do you sometimes find you've stopped breathing during the day? Anybody in this room, put your hand up if during the day you've forgotten to breathe. They're slowly going up as you're remembering. Does it normally happen when you are concentrating? You're cutting a crown, you're doing something complex, and you found you've held your breath. James, you mentioned it on day one. You said sometimes you're just not breathing. Did you ever wonder why? It's such a common thing that people don't even wonder why. My understanding here, IMOHO here, is that our pH is shifting. And if the pH shifts to a point that the brain believes that it needs to adjust the pH, it'll do a quick breath hold to push up the CO2 to increase the feedback. I'm literally going to stand in one spot, okay? It makes it very awkward to point over my shoulder. I believe that the brain will cause this breath hold to bump up the CO2, to produce the carbonic acid, to produce the buffer, to release the oxygen from the blood to go to the brain to cope with what we have asked it to do. And as I mentioned to you earlier, Alan covered this. He covered it this morning. That's to teach you. I'm going to cover it in a way that you can teach your patients. In a fun way, in a little graphic way, in a little flip chart way that you can build the whole thing up using cans of soda pop and phys-eology and all kinds of things to make it easy for them to understand what it is we want them to do. How many of you have had parents telling you they're concerned that their child holds their breath? Ever come across it? Any of you have children who you found holding their breath? A lot of them as attention seekers. But it's a commonly reported thing. Why should a child develop crooked teeth? Most people blame genetics. My child's teeth are crooked, look at his dad and look at his grandfather. Well, it doesn't necessarily follow. In a fight in the body between muscle and bone, muscle will always win. And by the way, we have loads of these cartoons and illustrations. I have a Spanish illustrator who can speak 3 words of English. Royer, he's done. Okay? That's all he says to me. He's done. Okay. But he's fantastic, and we've got several hundred illustrations that when you do my programs and you follow our systems, you get the table mats and you get illustrations and coloring books and special things to stick on the wall. You know, the wonderful job that the Moses Group have done with their documentation. They talk about, we have this booklet, the booklet is there. We do exactly the same thing. Little flyers, little templates, little ideas, little things to make things fun to help you get your point across. Why does a breath hold happen? Why, in the absence of a physical obstruction, should somebody stop breathing? Something to think about. You can understand somebody's got their fingers around your throat, you'll stop breathing. Your tongue falls back into your throat, you'll stop breathing. Your jaw slides back to the back of your head, you'll stop breathing. Why, if there is no obstruction whatsoever, should somebody stop breathing? Ever thought of it? Silly question. I mean, it's a simple question. It's a simple biochemical response. It's acid-base chemistry. This is Henderson-Hasselbalch. This is the Bohr effect. This is just about balance. This is just about maintaining pH at 7.35, 7.45, so that you can bond on at 0.45, you can release at 0.35, and it's the breathing that keeps the balance. Nothing here is new. You will not hear one word from me, apart from a couple of bad jokes, that do not come from an anatomy, physiology, biochemistry textbook. All I have done is take existing information and present it a little differently, with a bit of a weird sense of humor in places, so that it makes sense. Now, Alan, you and I are going to have an argument. I was told that we only have 50 trillion cells. Somebody says 300 trillion. Somebody says 100 trillion. Heaven help the poor bloke who has to count them. But be it sufficient to say, we got a lot of cells, okay? All of these cells have basic requirements. They require hydration, they require nutrition, they require cleaning, they require their windows washed and their noses blown and their teeth brushed and their CPAPs attached. Every cell needs to be maintained. And the main driver of cell health and cell ability is for the pH of that cell and of its surroundings and its cytoplasm to be in balance. And you know the pH scale at 0 to 14, and 0 is pool acid and 14 is what you use to clean the gunk on the barbecue. We operate roughly north of that, and this is the thing that I've prepared that you can actually show your patients' parents, because this is a bit of a fun thing. We talk about the body wanting to be in balance at 7.35, 7.45. If your pH drops to 6.8, or if your pH rises to 7.8, you get cell death. And if your cells die, you're going to follow, okay? So don't go there. How are we prevented from going there? We have a little sensor in the brain stem, and that is pH sensitive. And when it senses that the pH is shifting, either towards acidosis or alkalosis, it takes control. And it produces what we call buffers. The acid buffer is the carbonic acid, the alkaline buffer is bicarbonate. So, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15, 30 people, I'm going to mess with your pH, okay? I'm going to take your pH and jump it all over the place. You ready? Good, you don't have to move. What I want to do is I now want to make you acidic. So I'm going to ask you to hold your breath for about an hour. No, about 30 seconds, okay? And as you hold your breath, the CO2 is going to rise. And as the CO2 rises, I want you to become conscious of whether you feel anything happening. Let me tell you now, hold your breath and get to 6.8, you will faint. And that is why people drown. They don't consciously inhale water. They hold their breath underwater as long as possible. Yep, I got it right. And eventually the brain that doesn't know that you're underwater says, this person is going to kill themselves, I'm going to black them out. And you faint, and when you come out of a faint, what do? You do that underwater, your history, okay? So that's why you drown. So I'm not going to take you there. Even though there's a warning, I haven't seen any water around here yet. So what I want you to do now is for the next 30 seconds, hold your breath. You all ready? Start holding your breath now. And be conscious of whether you're feeling things. Well, that's 10. No big deal. 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. You can't hold your breath for 30 seconds? Okay, enough, all right? Phew. Oh, man, that was terrible, wasn't it? You feel some changes? You feel something was going on? The brain is saying to you, hang on, what kind of funny swacky backy are you smoking? You don't normally do this, get off. Do something. Now we're going to turn you alkaline and see how you feel. So instead of holding your breath for 30 seconds, I want you to hyperventilate for 30 seconds. And big time stuff. You all ready? Grab hold of the table. Start hyperventilating now. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Not feeling so crash hot, huh? Okay, knock it off. I don't want anybody passing out on me here. You see how quickly, when you dropped your CO2 levels, you started feeling like discombobulated, like, whoa, what's going on here? 20 seconds of hyperventilation makes you feel all strange. What about people who are hyperventilating all day? And this is one of the root causes of so many chronic illnesses, is low-grade chronic hyperventilation, where people get to that level and they then believe that that level is normal. And we're going to go through that now step by step. So where do we get our CO2 from? We can't get it from the atmosphere. There's 0.03%. As I mentioned to you, we make it ourselves. We make it from the byproducts of metabolism and exercise. So breathing's all about oxygen, right? What's the matter with you? Everybody normally says right. You listened this morning. General public will always say, I'm short of oxygen. I don't have enough oxygen. I need to breathe more to get more oxygen. Where can I get more oxygen from? And they go down to the oxygen bar and they pay $20 to stick a tube up their nose. I can think where else they could stick a tube. Okay, so one doesn't need... Ah, that's the alarm. Is it? It's come through on my hearing aids. Is it? Okay, because it came through here. So you better go. Okay, all right. So this has nothing to do with oxygen. Breathing has nothing to do with oxygen at this stage. Okay, breathing has a lot to do with oxygen as you get into the physiology of breathing, because you've got your partial pressures and you've got all the other things to do with oxygen exchange. But at this point in time, breathing is all about carbon dioxide. So once we've made it, we store it in the lungs. And I want you for a moment to think of your lungs like a little jacuzzi, a little spa bath. It's radical, but indulge me. You have a pump, you have an inlet, you have an outlet, and you have a reservoir. As long as the water is above the inlet, your spa bath is going to work. Drop the water below the inlet and what happens? The pump seizes. The motor burns out. The thing falls to pieces. Your lungs are exactly the same as a spa bath, excepting that instead of water, you've got carbon dioxide in that reservoir. And that carbon dioxide reservoir should sit at around 35 millimeters mercury pressure as an absolute minimum. The moment you drop below 35 and you drop below that threshold, it's the same as the spa bath dropping below the inlet. Things just don't function correctly. That's the situation as far as end-tidal CO2 is concerned. And the reason for that is, if you have less than 35, you don't have as much CO2 available as you want to produce your buffers to keep this in balance. Therefore, you become symptomatic, moving either side of the pH scale. This is a funny place, okay? And that is why people start developing these funny things, because they are permanently below the minimum EtCO2 threshold. So that's something really important to bear in mind. We did, of course, say that optimal is 40. And if you're breathing functionally, you will have an end-tidal CO2 pressure of around 40 millimeters mercury sitting in your alveoli. How do you do that? You breathe functionally. There is no such thing as normal breathing. There is only appropriate breathing. And your breathing rate, volume, and mechanics need to be appropriate for what you are doing. So functional breathing is defined as 8 to 10 breaths per minute at rest. Okay? In and out through the nose. You want to breathe through your mouth, learn to eat through your nose. Okay. Functional breathing should be driven from the diaphragm. You do not use the upper chest under any circumstances until you go into phase 2 breathing or secondary breathing, which requires you to vent off excess CO2. And at that point in time, the intercostals come in, the scalenes come in, the pecs come in, the mouth opens, and you get rid of the excess carbon dioxide. So please bear in mind that everything we're talking about here is relative. It's all relative to the set position of your breathing trigger. Well, if you're breathing 8 to 10 breaths per minute at a minute volume of 4 to 5 liters, everybody agree that 4 to 5 liters a minute is minute volume accepted medically? It comes down to a very simple formula. The average female lung is around 380 mils. The average male lung is around 500 mils. You multiply those out by 8 to 10 breaths per minute, or you divide a minute volume by the volume of air moved by the lung, and that's when you get your breaths per minute. So we're looking at the right number of breaths per minute, with the right amount of air per breath, using the correct mechanics for the appropriate situation. And at rest, it's 4 to 5 liters, 8 to 10 breaths, in and out through the nose. Please remember that functional breathing is silent. If you can hear somebody breathe, they are moving too much air. It's that simple. So now we've got that, and we know that if you're doing that functionally, you're going to be sitting with an end-tidal CO2 of around 40. What happens if your breathing pattern is not functional? You cough, you sneeze, you sigh, you yawn, you're in pain, you don't use your diaphragm, you're using your upper chest, you talk too fast, you behave like a pork chop on a bad Tuesday, you're yelling and screaming at people. You never see 40 millimeters worth of CO2 end tidal. The brain says, I get it. This is something that I call the Jack Nicholson effect. It's as good as it gets, okay? So you keep on saying to the brain trigger, I only have 30, 28, 29, 31. I'm huffing, I'm puffing, I'm panting, I'm short of breath, I'm asthmatic, I'm whatever it is. Eventually the brain gets to the point where it says, I get it. You don't have that. You only have that, or you only have that. I'm going to create that as the new normal. And I have a fascinating piece of research which came out of a hospital in Ireland and one in Istanbul, or Bucharest, or somewhere around there. Two teams collaborated, and I can show you a copy of it afterwards. Their goal was to try to recreate normocapnia by using a breathing mask and hooking people up to this breathing mask for several hours a day, causing them to change their breathing rate and depth. And after a period of time, they showed that the breathing sensor repositioned itself. It's the first time I've ever seen it in print. This is what Buteyko said in 1953, and this is what we've experienced over the years with millions of people. But this is the first time I ever saw it in print. But they used a mask. Well, doesn't that also tell you that if they've created a normocapnia, and by the way, it had to be several hours a day, several days a week, is it not possible that the beneficial effects of PAP on central sleep apnea could be by default? Is it not possible, if the mask is keeping the mouth closed and preventing the loss of the CO2, and the bilevel movement or the adaptoservoventilation movement of this $3,800 machine is kind of giving you a breathing balance? You think that could perhaps be one of the reasons that it's effective? Well, we can achieve the same with a roll of micropore tape and some breathing exercises. And you don't need a machine on your face, and you don't need to go to bed looking like Darth Vader, and you don't need to spend $3,800 on a machine. So just something to bear in mind, that some of these things, whilst they might appear to be the gold standard, and James, correct me if I'm wrong, ASV is the gold standard for CSA now?
It depends on the reason for it. It depends on the reason for the central sleep apnea.
Yeah, but BiPAP, VPAP, ASV is more or less what's recommended for managing CSA. All right, so these are the interesting little things that we're talking about here. Second only to heartbeat. We breathe more times a day than any function in the human body. Did you ever think about that?